Hello? Hey everybody. Welcome again. I can't really see anybody out there, but it looks like a lot of people out there, so that's great. Okay. Good. Yes, so welcome to our first plenary session. This session, we're doing things a little different. We are extremely happy to have Dr. Shirley Malcom here from the AAAS, the American Association for the Advancement of Science. And what we're doing is we're calling this a conversation with Shirley Malcom. So you can see there's a bunch of people here, and we're going to have a conversation. So I'm the program chair for this conference, this meeting, and one of the awesome things I get to do is get input from our members and then pick and invite awesome speakers to come to our meetings. And so we're really excited to have Shirley here. The idea here is that we're going to leverage Shirley's expertise in education, inclusion and diversity, and public understanding of science and technology, and her work in policy, and also leverage the expertise of our friends from AIP, Bethany Johns, and our AAPT membership. So we have Eleanor Hook, representing student membership. We have Nina Dane representing high school membership. We have Arlisa Richardson representing two-year college membership, and we have Scott Franklin representing four-year colleges and universities. Sound okay? Mm-hmm. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do an introduction to Shirley and Bethany, and I'm going to turn into Bethany, and Bethany is going to tell you a little more about our interviewees. Okay, everybody on board? Okay. Great. Okay, so Shirley Malcom has been in many leadership roles. She's the current director of Education and Human Resources at the AAAS. This directorate in the AAAS includes programs in education, activities for underrepresented groups, and public understanding of science and technology. She's been at AAAS for some time, and she also served as the head of the AAAS Office of Opportunities in Science. She's also served as a program officer in the Science Directorate of the National Science Foundation, and before that, she was a biology professor at the University of North Carolina in Wilmington. She was also a high school teacher for 2 years, so she's kind of done it all. She has a bachelor's degree with distinction in zoology from the University of Washington, and she holds 13 honorary degrees. She got her doctorate in ecology from Penn State University, and she's chaired a number of national committees addressing education reform and access to science and technical education, careers in literacy, and much more. So, I'm going to turn this. Next time I'm going to put it all on one page. But sometimes it doesn't fit on one page. So other cool things in 2003.
All right.
What happened? Oh, that's enough? Oh, I'm embarrassing you? Okay. Can I just one more? No. Okay. Just one more. So in 1994, she served on the President's Committee of Advisors in Science and Technology. Okay, that's stop. Okay, great. Okay, so now we get to introduce Bethany, and Bethany's been really great, helping us kind of do a lot of really important work. We're really thankful to her. So she works in government relations for the American Institute of Physics. She manages government relations and advocacy services, administering tailored and nuanced strategies to educate, inform, and constructively influence policy and policymakers. She worked on many issues, and she has her PhD and her master's in physics from Clemson University with an emphasis in policy studies and a BA in physics from Kenyon College. She's been great to work with. And I'm going to turn it over to Bethany and get off the stage.
Okay, thank you. Mel's a hard act to follow, yes, but thank you very much. So today, again, we're having a conversation, but let me introduce you to some of the panelists. As Mel has said, we have different representatives from different areas in their career and education. So let me start with Eleanor. Eleanor graduated from Rhodes College with a degree in physics and was also a member of Sigma Pi Sigma. She has a passion for science communication and education. In 2017, she was an SPS intern for the Mather Policy Internship, and she was actually working for the House Space, Science, and Technology Committee. So she did great work on that, on the committee, and thank you for that. She is now at the Museum of Life and Science in Durham, North Carolina, and the title is the Summer Camp Educator, and she also works as a freelancer as a science writer. And then we have a quick change in the program. We had someone, Alice, who couldn't make it with us today, but Nina, correct? Nina, okay.
Nina from Carolina. We have a North Carolina contingent.
Yeah, she's graciously accepted at the last minute, so thank you so much. So she is from teacher at Orange High School. Is it, you want to go ahead and quickly introduce yourself because I wasn't given a bio?
Yes, okay. So, yes, I've taught for 35 years in a public high school in North Carolina, 2 years in a private school. I'm a PTRA from here with the American Association of Physics Teachers. That's a group that does workshops and helps to encourage K-12 education. Alice, who's going to do that. I do have Alice's questions. She also is a PTRA. Please ask any of us about that if you want to know. I'm a presidential awardee in 1997 for the state of North Carolina and have my national board certification, master's in science education, and undergrad degree in biology from Appalachian State.
All right, thank you very much.
Oh, master's is from NC State. I guess I should give them a shout out too. Thanks.
And so next we have Arlisa. She completed a PhD in curriculum and instruction, specializing in science education at Arizona State University. She's worked as an engineer in the semiconductor manufacturing industry, but has accepted a position as a physics faculty at Chandler-Gilbert Community College in Arizona. So it's great to have you back into teaching. She's worked with diversity organizations to increase access to science and underrepresented minorities, and is now part of the AAPT Board of Directors and the AIP Team Up Task Force. So if you're not familiar with the Team Up Task Force, you can ask us later too, or you can speak more about that. And then last but not least, we have Scott Franklin, who is now teaching at RIT, Rochester Institute of Technology in New York, as an assistant professor in the School of Physics and Astronomy. But he also directs the Center for Advancing STEM Teaching, Learning, and Evaluation, acronym is CASTLE. One of CASTLE's key focus areas is to enhance the education and careers of groups historically excluded from STEM disciplines, and includes collaboration with women in science. A CASTLE-affiliated program that seeks to engage women in science and mathematics. So thank you all for being here this evening. So without further ado, we'll begin with asking questions. So the idea is we'll go along and each participant will be able to ask a question, and then when we have time, we'll maybe ask additional questions, but we certainly want to leave time also for the audience to ask questions. So my job is timekeeper, and I'll try to make sure that we stay on time. So, without further ado, Eleanor, you want to start with the first question?
Yeah, absolutely. So my question relates to outreach, because I think undergraduate and graduate students are in a somewhat unusual position in that they are knowledgeable enough to teach others, but they're still students themselves. And so because of this, a lot of students perform some sort of outreach or teaching. So I wanted to ask you, what are some of the advantages of students teaching others or performing outreach, and are there potential pitfalls, and how can we work to avoid those?
I think the greatest advantage is that the students tend to be closer in age to the people that they are really interacting with. And that's really a positive thing because they can be kind of more contemporaneous role models. The other thing is that what it tends to do for the students who are doing the teaching is that it often solidifies their own commitment to the discipline. It gives them enough of a taste of teaching that they are often drawn into it or begin to really be a lot more intentional with regard to good teaching practice. And I do think that when you are that close to the students, as opposed to this big lecture hall or whatever it is, but when you're interacting with the students, you're more likely to know the rest of what's going on in their lives. And you can use those aspects as kind of springboards to really tailor the subject area to things that the kids care about. So I'm a big fan of that. I think the only pitfall to it is don't just go in there and feel as though you know it all. They have a lot to teach you. And trying to really find out where they're coming from and seeing what they already know is oftentimes, and affirming that they know things. It's oftentimes really the kind of encouragement that is needed for the students.
Thank you.
So I'm a big fan.
All right, great, thanks.
Okay, so the question that we have is that the majority of students taught in K-12, teachers will not become scientists. What do you think the top 2 or 3 scientific concepts?
The top 2 what?
2 or 3 scientific concepts or processes that all students should be able to be taught? If you choose your top 3.
Just 2 or 3.
Don't ask me anything hard or anything. I mean, if we were talking about biology, that would be really easy, because the biological sciences community is actually engaged in a process of the community talking about what the big ideas are and what kind of concepts that they wanted all students to know. And in those particular cases, they came up with 5. Now, you think about the size of a biology book and the fact that you could come up with 5. There are competencies, yes, but 5. All right. I think that one of the things that I want all students to know is that facts matter. There really is something called evidence.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right? And if somebody tells you don't believe what you see, check it. I think that I want students to understand that there are certain things, in certain ways, that that nature is predictable. Mm-hmm. And that what we have to do is to find out what her secrets are, what she has to tell us. And that these things, to the extent that possible, they're knowable. I want everybody to kind of keep the excitement that they come into the world with about finding out. And if I can just get those things nailed down, I will be a happy camper.
So just to make sure you answer the question, I heard 2 things, right? Facts matter.
I gave her more than 2.
Okay.
Facts matter. There really is such a thing as evidence. If somebody tells you don't,
Yep.
see?
Be excited. The other thing I was interested in too, the whole process of the biology community coming up with their 5 things. I mean, I'm just speaking for myself here, but I think that'd be wonderful for the physics
There was
community to
blood on the
decide
floor.
I'm sure there was.
It was not a pretty sight at first, but we've all ended up in a better place. Okay? Yes, but the process was very powerful. And I read a quote from Bob Zemsky that I talked about this morning, that he said that, that every individual faculty member has the ability to affect the way they teach. But when you start to talking about about affecting the curriculum, it requires the community. Mm-hmm. The community must agree. And we basically had to go into a community process where we, in some cases, duked it out. And I think that we're the better for it because we have begun to understand that while facts may matter, facts also change, and that having a book that's that thick doesn't really help you to understand the ideas. Okay, you are basically chronicling what somebody has discovered over time. But the fundamental things that are going to basically be enduring are the concepts. The details may change, but the concepts are the things that are really important.
Cool.
Yeah, thank you.
Well, following up on that, we live in a time where kids are coming out of high school with standardized tests, and they come into the classroom focused on grades only, you know, counting points and grades. How can we teach them to value understanding the concept and keeping that in line and not just counting? Grades are important, I'm not saying that they're not, but not counting grades constantly, but valuing understanding the concepts.
Well, the problem is that what we incentivize is what we get. And right now, what people are incentivizing is they're incentivizing grades. They don't necessarily incentivize learning. But where the opportunity comes to really switch that around is in project-based or problem-based work. When they are looking at authentic things that they want to understand, especially about their own community or about their own world. You can get them so sucked into the problem that it becomes less important than the grade. And I think that that's really the way we have to start thinking about it. The other part is that the use of the out-of-school time. I am a big believer in the opportunities for learning that occur outside of the school, largely because you can't fail it. You don't assess it, you can't fail it. You work on it with others. There are a lot of kind of things that you want that are really good ideas that you want people to do, but they're not necessarily going to do it in the context of the classroom. And it's very hard for you to move them in that direction because of the political pressures that surround testing and things like this, right? So the kind of accountability issues get in the way of the learning issues. So given that that is the fact, building relationships with external, with out-of-schools settings is often a much more powerful way to get them to value learning. That's where we have to get them. The other part is that we have to move all of our students to a point where they're going to have to learn how to continue to learn. Otherwise, they're not going to survive the workforce, their lives, or anything else. And you can only do that by getting them really loving learning. And I think that's really where I want us to go.
Can you think of just a follow-up question? You mentioned problem-based work. Can you give an example of something that's worked in your experience?
Well, I'll give you an example of when my kids were in school back ages ago, where they actually went to an area stream and collected data about flow, about the temperature, about a lot of different things about that. And then they looked at what was in the water in terms of living things. So they were able to look at factors that were physical factors of the local environment as well as biological ones. So it was very interdisciplinary in terms of their work. But that means the other thing is, in a lot of cases, there are things that you don't necessarily think about. And that is kids getting interested in the of whether or not their water in their school is something that they ought to be drinking. And collecting the data themselves and looking at trying to account for the variables that might be in play. Is the water on the first floor different from the water on the second floor? You know, why might that be the case? You know, the age of the pipes, I mean, there's lots of different questions. There are questions all over the place. So being able to get involved in some of those.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah. All right, Scott?
Thank you. So my question deals with the demographics of the undergraduate student population. The demographics of undergraduate student population, which is significantly different than when I was in college, or even 10 or 15 years ago. And students now are more diverse. They much more frequently balance schoolwork with jobs, and the four-year track is increasingly rare. So I'm wondering, what are the changes that you feel departments can make to better serve this changing population?
A couple of years back, I think that you know that I chaired the Academy Committee that produced the report, Barriers and Opportunities to 2-year and 4-year STEM degrees. There were a lot of really different things about that report and about the study, the consensus study that we did. One was that we gave equal time to 2-year institutions. We didn't see how you could not, given the role of 2-year institutions, especially in terms of diversity. We were having large Latino populations. Basically, you look at a place like California, that's where the students are. You know, the Willie Sutton approach to research. You know Willie Sutton? The famous bank robber?
Oh.
When asked why he robbed banks, he said, because that's where the money is. Yeah, that's where the students are. And so we began to look at the demographics, and one of the things that we reflected on very quickly was that the student populations tended to be older, that they worked, that they were working, and as you can predict, the students didn't look like the faculty. The overall student population did not look like the STEM population. And the STEM population leaked out a lot more than the other populations. Oftentimes, the way that our institutions count the students, we don't necessarily know that. Because when they look at retention, they look at the institution, not necessarily at the major. So we were trying to figure out, you know, well, what's going on? What's going on is the K-12 population is already on its way to where our higher ed population will be if we're lucky. The consequences of not being able to draw that population into higher ed is bad for all of us. It's not only bad for the young people, but it's bad for our economy, because we're not going to have the kinds of skills that we need in order to keep the economy robust. But it's bad for the individuals, because they're going to be, you're just not going to have the social mobility that is absolutely essential within a democracy. So there's just lots of bad things that can happen. And I do think that there is kind of a misunderstanding of right now in the policy conversation about all of that. You hear a lot of things about training. Training is a short-term fix. Reskilling is a short-term fix. Education is what is needed. You must be able to move people to a point where they can continue to learn and reskill themselves, and that they know that this notion of continuous improvement is what is required. And I think that there's not an appreciation for that within the policy environment. The policy environment suffers from the same thing that it always does, I'm sorry I'm running on about this, but the policy
good.
environment is kind of like where we are right now. It suffers from the same thing that it always has, and that is that it's a short time horizon and not a real appreciation for the fact that education takes time. That it takes time to get people to a point where they can continue to learn, where they're bringing the skills that they need for a lifetime. That's what we're trying to do in these kinds of discussions here.
Yes, applause when you feel strongly, for sure. So in terms of the policy context, what I want to make sure the audience understands is that just last week, the Perkins reauthorization was passed, and I believe it's currently at the President's desk for signing. And the Perkins Act is the legislation from Congress that does the career and technical training funding for colleges and universities. So there is definitely a significant focus on the training and skills in this Congress. And there's also a significant emphasis on it through the Office of Science and Technology Policy, which is in the White House right now. So they're definitely very focused on the skills and technical workforce aspect, because they're hearing from industry that there are not enough people to fulfill these types of jobs that they have. But then when you also talk to industry people, they need the people who also know how to learn. So there's this balance that policy is trying to work itself out right now. I think that's a very interesting point. But then I just wanted to also comment, I noticed you said students don't look like the faculty, and then you cringed. Did you want to follow up on that statement?
That's an easy one.
Okay.
And I mean, I don't mind talking about it. When I went to college, I had to become something I'd never seen. And you have no idea of how hard that is. Because at every turn, you basically are doubting whether you can get through a system that basically has provided you no existence proofs whatsoever that in fact that you could be this thing. All right? So you say it doesn't matter, it may not matter, or what have you. I want to tell you a story from my freshman year. It matters. So I was a freshman, and I had a chemistry lab at the University of Washington, yes. The first lab quiz, I got a 9 out of 20. The second lab quiz, I got a 7 out of 20. This is not the right direction. So I went to visit my TA, only African American graduate student in the entire department. So somebody said, well, why didn't you go to your faculty member, who was responsible for that? I said, I had just come out of Birmingham, Alabama in 1963, people. Do you understand what you're telling me? Mm-hmm. To go to this white guy and tell him I'm having problems? Because my expectation would be for him to say, well, you don't belong here anyway. Mm-hmm. Because quite frankly, those were the policy messages that came from Birmingham to people who looked like me. All right? Now, you could say, Shirley, get over it. All right? But I had only been there for 4 months. I've gotten over it, but at 4 months out of Birmingham, no. So I went and I was able to convince him that I was not dumb, I was underprepared, that in fact that people had not expected us to be good at this, so they hadn't given us the resources we needed. So he finally bought it. The next lab exam, I got an 18 out of 20, and he was happier than I was.
Aw, that's great.
Because he basically he felt vindicated. And I felt vindicated. And I think that it basically causes this adjustment inside of your head that, okay, it's not me. It's basically what I did or did not bring. And there are a lot of kids out there like that who are smart but underprepared. So how do you basically capture that talent? Because that's a talent discovery. Talent is developed. It's not this matter that all these people come through and they get these high grades or these high test scores on the SAT or what have you. You don't know how creative they really are. And you're not going to know how creative these other people are because they haven't had an opportunity to be able to show it. So I hope I have convinced you that sometimes having that kind of diversity is really important. I would not be here today were it not for the fact that I stumbled on the one person who basically was likely to say, okay, I believe you're underprepared, let's fix that. That's fixable.
Yeah, great, thank you. All right, so we'll go ahead and go through another round of questions, and then we'll spend time also with audience questions.
Yeah, that's actually, it's a really good segue into my question.
Is our mic working?
Is it working?
No.
Hello?
Speak loudly.
Okay. Oh, there we go. So that's a really good segue into my next question because it's not really a secret that in physics in general, but especially with women and minorities, there's a huge problem with imposter syndrome.
Yeah.
And you alluded to it yourself when you mentioned like the leakiness of STEM fields. And so my question is, what advice do you have for students who either don't feel smart enough to pursue a degree or some sort of education in science, or alternatively for students who are consistently underestimated by their professors and by their classmates?
You know, you would be surprised how little it takes to encourage somebody to hang in. Just by telling them, you're really good at this. Would you like to do this? Can you come and participate in research? You know, the opportunities to really just affirm for people that they are okay. I mean, if you're walking around with a tub full of doubt, it really doesn't take much for somebody to just punch a hole in that tub and reassure you that you are fine. And I think we have to do a lot more of that. First of all, we have to recognize that it is an issue. You know, and I have hauled around imposter syndrome my entire life, my entire career. And then I started meeting some of these muckety-mucks. And I realized how absolutely incapable they were. And comparatively speaking, how capable I was. You know, I could make it to the corner and back. But in any case, I think that it's a matter of really being affirmed by people you respect. It really is.
That's great. All right.
This second question from Alice basically is talking about a little bit of what you talked about. Your answer to my first question was, according to some of the research, Americans trust less in fundamental science right now. And do you agree that Americans trust less in fundamental science? And what do you see the role of K-12 or K-16 education in promoting both the advances of science and the trust in science? In fact, like you said, that there are facts, there's evidence that you can look at.
Yeah, I actually think that physics takes it less on the chin than a lot of other fields. People can get excited about the physics discoveries that are associated with planetary. They can get excited about the pictures that come from the different telescopes. They can get excited about LIGO. I actually gave a commencement address. And I talked about LIGO and New Horizons. And you would think I must have been out of my mind, okay? But the point of the commencement address was the idea of how absolutely amazing the human mind is, that it can solve these kinds of problems. And I think taking those opportunities to go into places that wouldn't necessarily be talking about kind of like these messages from the research, that people are a lot more interested in this stuff than you know, than you think. I mean, I've actually been able to get people that on first blush, they should not have been interested in this stuff, but they are. But I do think that you have an easier time than the biologist or the chemist. The chemist largely because of things like EPA. The biologist because of everything. I mean, you know, we do it all. We do evolution, we do all kinds of stuff that people have issues with. All right, but
Thank you.
So in the context of like the K through 12, you know, you feel like that those students are not losing their curiosity for science or those fundamental basic science ideas. You think the kids are okay, as they say?
the kids are okay.
The kids are going to make it?
And so are their
Okay.
parents.
Yeah.
I think that the curiosity is still there, but I really do think that you have less of an issue within things like physics if you can just make it accessible. Okay? It's fascinating, just make it accessible. Make it so that people really begin to understand, you know, how absolutely amazing some of this stuff is. Like when I talked about LIGO, I am not a physicist. I don't even play one on TV. But when I talked about LIGO, I talked about the kind of technological challenges of the kinds of measurements that are actually required in LIGO. And that I actually knew something about because I served on the National Science Board when we had to vote the $400 and some million out of a $3 billion budget to actually support the first phase of LIGO. This was a case of where you had to support something that you knew you weren't going to see for years, decades maybe, where you knew the technology was not there. Because nobody had tried to tell you we were there at the time, and that we had to get better and better and better in order to really be able to do this. I'd said to somebody at one point, you know, with Washington speak, I said, you know, we can get the money for this. All we have to do is explain to people that it's a huge public works project. Because initially, it was about building roads and tunnels and beams and stuff, okay? And doing really precise measurements, which would hold you in good stead with regard to building anything.
Yeah. Okay.
You hadn't thought about it like that.
No, that's very interesting. Next question.
Well, I do a lot of outreach work, and I'm working on the Team Up initiative where we are studying why there are so few African Americans in physics. And a lot of times in outreach efforts, a lot of the focus is put on changing the student and helping, and that's good to help the student, but what are some of the things that we could do as faculty members at the department level and even at the college and university level to make the environment more welcoming?
Oh my goodness, how long do you want to stay here?
I have some ideas, but I like to
actually, you're absolutely right. One of the criticisms that I make of intervention programs, as wonderful as they are, oftentimes in terms of keeping people around long enough for you to be able to grab them for your field, is the fact that they, in fact, aren't about institutional change. So the institution stays the same, and we basically try to make all the adjustments with regard to the student. We've got to get real about teaching, especially teaching, in your case, the intro level courses. When I was in school, the intro courses were just as they are probably thought of today as places where you weed people out. Weeding rather than cultivating. And they need to be places where we cultivate. All of my gardening metaphors. It's that time of the day. And I do think that there are opportunities to actually talk about what the aspirations are for the department. The difficulty is that departments don't necessarily set goals for themselves. And they for sure do not look at the metrics that come out of their classes. If you had a company and only half of the things that you touched in your company actually ended up being usable at the end, you'd go out of business. So how do you in fact justify these kinds of strategies and programs and teaching and what have you? But does anybody ever call anybody out? No. Do we look to see that some faculty members are better at keeping students and having success as students than others? You know, there's kind of a cult of silence that we have taken. We aren't being self-reflective. We're not looking at ourselves. And I think that until departments say we're going to own this problem, there's nobody else who can own this problem, and then we're going to basically go out. I looked at the data, you know, AIP, I love the AIP's data. I looked at the data.
Shout out to AIP data. Yeah.
I swear
Rachel
by
and Susan,
AIP's
if you're in the room,
data.
great job.
I mean, please never let us lose that. Because I looked at the data and I look at, for example, with regard to minority students, and I see that HBCUs and HSIs are being more successful in terms of yielding us people who get bachelor's degrees. So why aren't these other institutions just flooding the HBCUs and the HSI classes that are being successful to see what is it that they're doing that is not happening in the other institutions? And I think that to a certain extent, there is not really a sense that anything is wrong with them. Must be something wrong with the students, right? Right. So that's why they're the target of being fixed. So I do think that having more conversation about pedagogy, looking at the research, there is a body of research now around education. Why do we basically read the research on research that comes around our research and don't read the research that comes around our teaching? I mean, something is wrong there. And just because we know better, we are not doing better. And I think that we just got to stop it.
Wise words. All right. All right. Last question.
So you've alluded to our political situation a few times with facts and believing what you see. And certainly we in science and in academia in particular feel very much under attack. So I'm curious to know what you see as the greatest threat to science in general and academia in particular. And so we end on a better note. What makes you hopeful for the future that we can weather these?
If I had not been hopeful, I would not be here today. The major point is that, and I will give you an example, in K-12 is still controlled by states and localities. That means that there's an opportunity for all of you to basically get engaged with local school districts and with state boards and volunteer to actually look over this stuff before it actually goes into anybody's classroom. There is the opportunity to really become more grassroots oriented and begin to participate in some of these conversations. When my children were in school, I got involved with our local school district, and we had a science committee, advisory committee to the board, to the school system. And we would orchestrate our presentations to the Board of Education so that different ones were talking about different aspects of what we needed. For example, there was not really the appreciation that if you were in biology, that you might need expendables. They got it with regard to art. They didn't get it with regard to science. And so there were all of these things that you had an educative role to play with. So I think that what you're really asking me is, what do you do until the revolution comes? And what I'm saying is that you deal with the reality that you're given. What is it that we teach we deal with the situation we have, not the one we wish we had. So under that circumstance, you get involved. The other part of that is that there are still the opportunities for out-of-school kinds of things at the K-12 level, and you can, in fact, do this. It was a wonderful program that Delta Sigma Theta sorority did for a number of years called Delta C, Science and Everyday Experiences, where we did training with this is for those of you who don't know, Delta Sigma Theta sorority is an African-American, largely African-American women's group that is a service sorority, and it's college-educated women. And there are a lot of scientists and engineers and educators among the group. And so we did training, and we provided easily available materials-based stuff that you could do. And then they would do like activities where they would invite families and do activities like on weekends and things like this. Well, you are situating yourself in the community with people who are from that community, who look like the kids that you're trying to affect, and you're doing science. So you're affirming science in those kinds of settings. That's a good thing to do. And with regard to colleges and universities, with regard to two-year colleges, I think that because of the tie to reskilling and things like this, there are opportunities. Just don't listen to the short-term stuff. Really educate for the future. And with regard to colleges and universities, I think that colleges and universities have an outsized responsibility to the communities that are around them. Never mind the kind of larger national conversation and what have you. But it means that we have to become more humble. We can't go in there as the experts. We have to basically go in there as co-learners. We have to respect there's community knowledge. We've got to go in and help people solve the problems that are important to them. And I think that under those kinds of circumstances, and in some cases leading with our students, that we can get people's attention and we can do a lot of good.
All right. Thank you very much. So we do have time for questions from the audience. I believe we do have one mic that will be roaming around. And as we wait for you to raise your hand, we'll try to make sure you get a mic, but if you don't, feel free to speak loudly. Introduce yourself, where you're from, and then your question should, as Alan Leshner would say, the former director of the AAAS, your question must end with an inflection upwards at the end, you know?
And it doesn't just have to be to me. I mean...
Yeah, it could be to any one of the panelists, yes.
They know stuff.
So there was a question, I believe, in the center here. I saw someone's hand was raised. Okay, we'll start over here where it's easier for the mic to get.
Hello. My name is Simone Hyder-Adams. I'm from the University of Colorado Boulder, and I'm a grad student there. Thanks so much for all the words and all the questions. It kind of got me riled up over here. I was like, yeah. So I'm shifting to working a lot in informal science and outreach spaces. Shout out to the IPER group, if you haven't heard of us. And so we're really interested in finding a lot of what you talked about, or researching, I should say, a lot of what you've been talking about, the out-of-school spaces and general project-based ways, community knowledge around physics, and we think a lot about how to bring physics to the community. There's a lot of people, I think, doing it in these, who are at this conference right now. And so I guess I have a kind of general question, mostly, I guess, for Shirley, but honestly, anyone who's on the panel, I'd be interested to hear your thoughts. I'm really interested in the ways that integrating the arts in physics can actually help bridge this kind of I don't like to use the word gap, but I'll use it now, to the community that we find within physics, within the community, the physics community, I should say. But I'm interested in how arts basically can help us connect more with people on a day-to-day basis. And I wondered if you had any thoughts around like where the arts kind of collides with physics in your experience, or that you've seen it happening currently or in the past.
Did that question make sense? You got all of that?
No, I didn't get all of it.
So the main one, the main question was, in your experience, or what have you observed about trying to incorporate the arts in teaching of the science, especially in maybe informal education time? Does that make sense?
You realize it's really only fairly recently that we separated these things.
Yeah, it used to be the School of Art and
remind
Science.
us, I have this cartoon that I had one of my staff draw. As a picture of Leonardo, and he had all of his art stuff lined up over here and his science stuff over there, and it says, "Why do I have to choose?" And I do think that there is an increased amount of design thinking that is actually going into the sciences, and that we're embracing, and that is a strategy for getting a lot of people who may be still wary of science kind of into the fold, that in fact that they are more comfortable if they come from that particular direction. In some cases, I think it's a matter of simply showing them where the arts have in fact been incorporated. Do you remember the kind of origami thing that they had with regard to the shield, so they were actually having to use the arts in order to get the stuff to fold and to fit in the space that they had. So it's not really that whatever. But my point is that we shouldn't have to pit one of those things against the other. Yeah. If we pull them together, that's great. There's not really a difficulty. Right now, what I'm fascinated by this artist, the work of this artist by the name of, I think it's Untermühlen, who had Alzheimer's. And he was drawing pictures of himself throughout the entire time of the decline within his disease. So one of the things that I actually looked at was the pictures. And then I looked at what is typical Alzheimer's brain scans at about the same point in time, and it's absolutely amazing to go back and forth between those pieces. You realize that there is a lot that you can begin to kind of understand about all of this. But let me just say this. The out-of-school space is hard space to find resources for. Because you keep having to raise them. But there's an opportunity, people. Broader impacts. You know broader impacts? If you don't know broader impacts, you didn't get funded. If you don't know broader impacts, you didn't get reviewed. Okay? One day I'll tell you where that came from.
Next plenary session.
But they present an opportunity. Yeah. You don't know where they came from.
Where broader impacts came from?
Yeah.
Well, we want to make sure we ask one more question, so you can tell us later on the after show.
I'll keep that.
Okay.
Save it.
All right, I think we have time for one last question. You want to just keep testing it? Yeah, there you go.
Hi, I'm Lauren. I'm the American Physical Society's Congressional Science Fellow. Thank you. And I kind of wanted to ask about sort of the self-reflection of physics departments, because I really liked what you said about how we should just pause and be self-reflective and sort of think of our aspirations and our values and measure success and things like that. But then I thought back to sort of an earlier statement that you said, which was, we get what we incentivize. So I was wondering, how do you change science policy so that you can incentivize departments
How do
valuing?
you change science policy so that you incentivize what?
departments valuing self-reflection and self-measurement and things like that?
We saved the hardest question for last. Yeah, so how would you reform university education? We all want to know. We're eager listeners.
Actually, I had a shot at it. That's what broader impacts came from.
All right, tell us the story.
If you want something to happen, you basically have to change the policy so that you must do this thing in order for it to happen. That is basic, whether that is at a federal level, whether that is at a state level, whether that's at an institutional level, whether it's at a department level. If your promotion and tenure committee, for example, thinks that the teaching evaluations that as currently given are the best way to measure teaching, you are done for. Because we know that there are all kinds of problems associated with those, including the fact that they are incredibly biased against women and minorities. As faculty, did you know that? So you have to have some different way of actually measuring the things that you value. Lauren Resnick told me this a long time ago. We tend to value what we can measure rather than measure what we value. So you've got to figure out first what you value. And then you got to change the rules, because that's all policy is. They're rules. You just got to change the rules so that they go along with what it is that you're trying to accomplish. And this is one of the things that did happen in terms of broader impacts, and that was that I was on the Separate of the Science Board at the time, and I volunteered for the Strategic Planning Committee. And I want to just point out, I've actually told this audience before what you volunteer for if you're on a committee. Volunteer for budget, volunteer for nominations, and volunteer for strategic planning. Volunteered for strategic planning because you need to basically set a vision for whatever the organization is, and you measure against the vision that you've set. And in that particular case, the only way an agency is going to carry out a vision is, in the case of an NSF, is the way it gives out money. And the only way that you can affect that is to affect the criteria. And if the criteria are not doing it for you, you got to change them. And that's really the basic idea. And in those particular cases, why should the public basically support our research if we are in fact not letting them in on the results of that research? That's the only thing that broader impacts is basically saying, that the people who are paying for it basically deserve to, in fact, get paid back. And publishing for your friends to read it is not payback. That's painful, okay? But just remember, if the last thing I will say, what you incentivize is what you will get. Word for the day.
All right. Well, thank you very much. So I just want to say thank you again to Shirley, and we had a wonderful conversation. We hope you'll come again. Next time maybe we'll have coffee and a coffee table and cookies or whatever. But I want to just give the panel also a round of applause. Thank you so much. All right, and if you have further questions, feel free to reach them anytime during the conference or right after now. All right, thank you.
Next.